From the Palouse to Montlake, Washington has found their new athletic director again in Pat Chun.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Norman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. And Lars, it's a really, really big day around Husky media. As you know, we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, and all our everydayers will listen to this on Wednesday. The big news right off the bat, because there really is a lot to get to. Pat Chun has left Washington State. He's coming across the state, coming to Seattle, coming to Washington. And as you and I discussed a little bit yesterday, we kind of hinted at that this seemed like it was trending to be the hire, that was trending in that direction. Now that it's official, you as a Washington State alumni, you know him a little bit, just this seems like a really fantastic hire from my point of view, but I'm going to just hand it off to you here.
Yeah, no, Pat, I mean, again, I've seen the reaction on Twitter from Washington State fans. It's understandable, right? I mean, Washington, to a degree, had the same reaction with Troy Dannen leaving, where some people say, hey, he didn't like him, but there's a number of other people you can go look on Wazoo Twitter, and it's like, hey, you know what, he was a great guy, and kind of just understood the assignment, right? Where it's, look, Pat Chun was not going to be a Mountain West AD. I don't think anybody, again, if you're a Washington State fan and as an alum, I would love it if he stayed, right? That would be awesome. Sure. But after coming from Florida Atlantic, why would you go back down? Like, it almost seems like, look, you know what? And again, people will blame Pat Chun. I said this on yesterday's show. People will blame Pat Chun for not getting Washington State into a power conference. It wasn't solely his decision. It wasn't Pat just sitting there like, I'm good. We're going to waste away here anyways, and then I'll leave. Like, no, he was trying as hard as he could. I think others above him are the ones that should be held responsible. I've said from day one, Kirk Schultz should have been gone a long time ago, but that's beside.
So I'm sorry. There's something I wanted to say on that note, because that was one of the big things that I'm really glad you brought that up. That's one of the big things that I remember I've seen on social media in terms of Husky fans reacting to the news is, oh, well, he failed because he didn't get Wazoo. He sat on his thumbs and didn't let Wazoo get into any conference. He didn't let him make a move. That's not necessarily the case here, where that decision goes over even his head, where ultimately that decision is made by the president and the board of regents.
Exactly. And that was clear from day one. I mean, Pat, that's why they had Kirk Schultz and all the other Anna Marie Casa and all the other presidents having those TV contract negotiations. It wasn't Pat Chun. Now, again, Pat could be the biggest advocate in the world and say, hey, you know what? We're beating the drum. We're trying to get Washington State in. But that's just not real. Like, to expect. I mean, Oregon State didn't do that, and you don't hear anybody clamoring for their AD to be let go or whatever the case may be. So I think it's a natural reaction, right? People are upset, and I think it doesn't help that Kyle Smith leaves the day before to go to Stanford, and a similar track where it's like, wow, can we just not keep anybody? But it's almost like it's just the reality and the unfortunate reality of college football where Washington State's at, where Pat would be doing himself a disservice to not take the job. And people can say, I can understand taking a better job, but not that one. It's like, well, I mean, money is money. It's not. And here's the other.
And it goes so far beyond money too, though. At a certain point. No, sorry, please continue. I'll get back to it.
But here's the other side of that. He's not an alum of Washington State. It would be different if he, went to Washington State, had been there for 10 years, 12 years, whatever, and then bolts at the last, the 11th hour to Washington. Yeah, that'd be kind of weird. But no, you came to Washington State from somebody else. It was clearly an alum of Ohio State, fond of Ohio State, didn't get the AD job. Some people say, hey, isn't that a red flag? It's like, well, Ohio State's AD job and Alabama's AD job, there's very few of those in the country. Washington is kind of that next tier, and then Washington State and others are below that. So it's a matter of perception. And again, there was a number of other ADs that didn't get that job besides Pat Chun. So I don't think there's anything when you look at his resume, what we talked about yesterday, you highlighted magnificently his fundraising prowesses. And I think that's something to be said where, yeah, he didn't get Washington. Okay, fine. If you want to say he didn't get Washington State into a conference, whatever, I'll give you that one. But then look what he did give you. Like, he almost tripled, or at least doubled, if not tripled, your donor investment. And so to me, especially doing that in a school which is notoriously hard to recruit to and sell to, just imagine what he can do with the resources.
Yes, that's the biggest thing, and that's what I'm really glad that. Another thing that I'm really glad you brought up, because that's what I was going to say. Where he's making this leap into a Power 2 conference at this point. I like you said yesterday, it's weird that that we're at that point, but that's what it is. It's the fact that he did so well raising money at Washington State. Imagine what he can do with some of the donor backing that Washington does have. And again, despite what Troy Dannen's comments may have been about the state of Washington athletics, they're still in a really, really good spot. And when you look at what the state of Washington athletics is versus Wazoo, there's no comparison. And you kind of have to make that move. It's what's best for you, and it's what's best for your family. And it's not like he's moving halfway across the country. It's not like he's doing anything like that. It's 3-4 hour drive. It's really not that bad in the grand scheme of things. And just all the resources, everything that you can have here, from the football team, the new basketball coach, to a top 10 softball program, to all the other things that Washington has along with it, besides, just the grander backing of what Seattle is. It's just not a contest. And, he also did a really good job when it comes to helping make sure the Apple Cup stayed intact. And just, it's really fun to just look at the grander picture of what Pat Chun can do here. And it's another thing that you said on yesterday's show where, he can certainly be a longer term hire than what Troy Dannen ended up being, where, at some point he was probably going to jump for a job. It just didn't feel like it was going to be within 6 months, where feels like for Pat Chun, if it's not Ohio State, he's probably here for the long term.
Right, because again, when you look at, especially going from Washington to Washington State to Washington, there's no, now I'm going to go to Indiana, or I'm going to go to Louisville. There's no other quote unquote lateral or slightly upper. I mean, Auburn maybe, but there's so many of those other jobs that are rarely coveted, or not rarely coveted, rarely open. And the other thing to consider that we didn't mention on yesterday's show is Pat Chung's now going to be a part of the CFP selection committee moving forward in 2024 for the next 3 years. Michigan's AD Ward Manuel is the chairman of that committee. So having Michigan and Washington on that committee, think about that. Like there's no Ohio State again. Now you still recuse yourself and all that, but you're still having some representation in that room puts more legitimacy behind it. And especially with Pat's abilities, and Pat's well known across college football and in the CFP and all that stuff. He's been an integral part of a lot of that stuff. So to me, it's not necessarily like there's very little downside and very high upside. Like I can't really, Absolutely. I mean, there's no way in which I see this going sideways. Like I just have a hard time seeing this fit end up poorly.
You're right. And so the last thing that I think that we can say on this, just in terms of what we can look at, because obviously we'll talk to him at some point over the next week or two, but from now until then, one other thing that you can hang your hat on is Pat is one of the I don't want to say innovators, but one of the people at the front of figuring out what NIL is going to be, where he testified in front of the House subcommittee. He's done all these different things to help make sure that NIL is good, not only good for the players and good for the schools, but well regulated. And there's a way that it can all be controlled instead of, as people keep using the term, the Wild West. So that's another thing where, as it's because it's going to be regulated at some point. It's just a matter of when, not if. And with Pat Chun as somebody who's been part of those discussions, you can bet that Washington and Montlake futures are going to continue to be at the forefront of whatever NIL is. And with that being said, Lars, he wasn't the only person to, in a sense, commit to Washington on Monday, as UW also got a commitment from 3-star running back Julian McMahan. And we'll get there right after a message from our friends over at Better Together. Is your bracket already busted? Are you tired of the same old daily fantasy grind where you make a roster, cross your fingers, and hope for the best, or maybe losing on the last leg of your pick'em entry? Introducing Better Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs and you can play with your friends, not against them. Pick more or less on real-time player stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds, and climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the social DFS movement. One of the coolest things about Better Together, it makes you realize that DFS is fun alone, but like a lot of other things, it's better when doing it together with your friends. It shows that synergy from working together gives you better chances at winning than going at it alone, because it's all about the team. It's a super fun way to stay connected with your friends, because gone are the other days of watching sports together with friends in person. Like for me personally, like it's fun to use that to stay connected with some of my friends over in Boston from where I went to school. Download Better Together now from the App Store, and you can sign up using promo code Locked On for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember the code Locked On, because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. And before we get back to it, we've also got a message from our good friends over at Fire TV, because Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis and so much more. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from favorite sports brands, all for free. And hey, that includes all of us here at Locked On as well, and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences. Fire TV lets you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, from March Madness to the NBA to the MLB and lots more. Not to mention, it also has great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. You can check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Big breath there. That was all right. Lars, 3-star running back Julian McMahon announced his commitment to Washington, and he's a really, really promising back. I really like what I've seen from him on film. There are a couple different listings for him, but they're both 6'2". One of them has him at 195. One of them has him at 210. Let's be real. It's probably somewhere in the middle. So when I look at Julian McMahon, I see a really hard runner who is a perfect back for the Big Ten. His athleticism is really, really good. He's somebody who can want to run a wide zone scheme really well, and somebody who, when you look at what Jedd Fisch and his team want, and Scottie Graham as well, not only what they want a running back, but what they want in terms of moving into the Big Ten, he looks like a perfect guy for this scheme.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's kind of the traditional all-purpose back, right? Where he's no doubt a running back, but he's also got the ability to catch out of the backfield. I think he kind of prides himself on just doing a little bit of everything. But one thing I think that stands out, and will probably certainly get better as he gets older, but one thing that's already pretty well established is his vision. I think that's something that when you watch his tape, you can just see, even before the hole opens up, he already knows where to go. And if that one doesn't work, he knows how to bounce it outside. He has a quick decision maker. He's almost like a quarterback in that sense, where he's got to make that quick read, that quick decision, because he doesn't. There's not a lot of stutter step. There's not a lot of lateral movement. It's a lot of one cut go, maybe make a stutter step and go. But for the most part, his vision, I think, is what separates him more than anything. And when you're talking about going into the Big Ten, he knows the value of an offensive line, so he also knows kind of how to understand where offensive linemen are going in some of these schemes. So I think that's one thing that, and again, one thing that stood out to me was Arizona was the first offer that he got back in 2023. So Scottie Graham, these guys are liking him for a while. So it's not just, oh, hey, let's take this kid. It's an easy take. It's like, no, this is the guy they identified in the beginning of the class as somebody they wanted. And if anything, again, we can talk about this a little bit later, but if the numbers work out, they probably won't take a second back, but they might.
I think they will.
Just depend.
I've got some reasoning. I'll let you get there. I think they do take a second back.
And I don't disagree with you, but I think this is the perfect first take, similar to Jake Flores along the offensive line, where this is the guy this is the guy that we know, boom, we can count on. And whether it's a 4-star or 3-star that comes after him, this is the guy they clearly have identified and wanted. The next guy could either be a compliment or it could be a depth take, whatever you want to call it. But this is the guy that they certainly coveted in this 25 class.
Absolutely. And so I've got a couple of thoughts here. I'll start with one. You bring up a really interesting point. In Arizona was his first offer, because one thing is, as you and I, two guys who, whenever we look at recruiting, we'll probably get to him on another show with Phillip Bell, Vander Plug, some of these other guys who have set official visits as of late. When you look at a lot of just these high-end players, a lot of times their first offer is coming from Arizona. It's super interesting. One guy that I noticed that with is 2026 5-star quarterback Brady Smigel, who's going to be coming on an official visit at some point in the next month or so. And just when I look at all the players that UW is really interested in, they were all identified really, really early on. in the recruiting cycle, and a lot of the times by Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff, which is cool on a couple of levels. The first one being, obviously, it's nice when, you can establish that relationship early on. But secondly, it just kind of continues a long history of really, really good talent evaluation on Montlake that really started under Chris Peterson. When you go back and you look at some of his first recruiting classes, it was the whole, there aren't enough blue chips. There aren't a lot of guys like this. And then you look back and those classes had Greg Gaines, Will Dissly, Drew Sample, guys like that in each and every class. It's cool to see that tradition continue where, it's nice to see top 300 kids, top 247 kids make their way to Montlake. And obviously that's something Jedd Fisch wants to do, but taking guys like this too is really, really helpful for the class because while those are going to be the headliners of your class, it's guys like this that really make up the meat of it. And that can really, you can point to them in 3-4 years and say, hey, we really developed these guys. And it's like something that Armand Hawkins and John Richardson were saying on Twitter a couple weeks ago. Developing guys like this is awesome, and we love doing that. But you can sell that to some of these bigger players saying, if we developed guys with this ranking, imagine what we can do with you as well. And then to your second point, I do think this isn't the only take where another guy who's scheduled to take a visit is 3-star running back Anthony Leagues, another California prospect, because Washington's going to be losing at least 2 backs this year. When you look at Cameron Davis and Jonah Coleman, I'll bet they're both gone after this year. I believe it's Davis's final year of eligibility. I think Jonah Coleman has one more, but I wouldn't be surprised if he plays really well this year and opts to choose the draft. But behind that, there's just not a lot of experience in the room, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point there's another transfer out at some point because it's just so crowded. When you look at guys like Sam Adams, Daniel Ngata, and I'm not trying to run anybody down when I say it, but it's just so crowded that at some point somebody's probably going to have to transfer out just for numbers' sake. And then when you look forward, I'm sure Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff want to make sure they have more of their guys in there. So as I kind of look around and look at some of these other offers, I wouldn't be surprised if there's another running back taking this class.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that because that's one thing that I identified in this class is look at the number of running backs that they've offered. So they're casting a wide net. They obviously have a target of guys that they want, but I think that also identified that, and I think that kind of ties both the points in together where that's why they identified Julian McMahon so early. It's like, hey, that's the guy we want. There's plenty of backs in this class, so that doesn't prevent us from getting a second one. It makes it easier to where we can now move forward knowing we have at least one in the boat, right? Where otherwise you're still trying to balance, hey, do we take this guy or this guy? Does he fit well with this guy or this guy? And the other thing that's kind of important, and you mentioned it with the development and continuing on for Chris Peterson, Kalen DeBoer and the staff were also very highly interested in Julian McMahon as well. He took an unofficial visit for the Oregon game last year, was one of the players. I wrote about that on Inside the Huskies, where he was one of the players that was, ran on the field after the game. We saw Kamori House on a couple of videos. There was just there were a number of 25 guys on that field. And that game, I think I told you that day, was like, there's so many kids that their very first time visiting Washington was for that win over Oregon. And
do you know who another one of those guys was? Quarterback commit Dash Beerley.
Yeah,
okay,
I was wondering about. Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah,
it was, and I think Jake Flores was at the Apple Cup. So again, 2 pretty significant games in 23 that are going to lay the foundation for a lot of these kids. Now, again, obviously the Oregon game way more symbolic, monumental. Like there was about 10 times the number of visitors at that game, anyways. But I knew that's going to be a seed where that game and players being that was their first game, their first memory of being at a Husky Stadium game. That's going to be the seed that plants about 5 to 10 years from now. Like we're going to point back to that game and say, wow, that game, that atmosphere and everything that game set up. But then that's still for everything that's great about that. It's up to Jedd Fisch to carry that on. And we've seen early on, clearly he's picked up those relationships. And I mean, the McMahon one honestly was like perfect fit because it was clear early on that he was very high on Washington, whether it was under Kalen DeBoer or Jedd Fisch. But he also really liked the staff at Arizona when they were down there. So it's like when he told me when they came together, it was seamless. He's like the only thing that changed was just which school we were talking about.
You're absolutely right. And I'm thinking back on more of those guys that we know were there that day because we talked about some of the headliners of this class. Dijon Lee was there. Phillip Bell was there. There are so many players that you can point to because before Kalen DeBoer's staff departed, it was all about this class of 2025. And a lot of these guys that you've seen just continue on this relationship with Jedd Fisch's staff once they got here. And Dijon Lee is the prime example of this, where you look at them and they were all saying the exact same thing. It's, I really like this coaching staff. And obviously, like a lot of them are still talking to them over at Alabama. But the thing that sold most of them was the school and the environment and Washington itself, which is just really fun to think about in terms of the grand scheme of things, because that's always been the sell. The coaching staff is great, but it's about selling kids on the school itself. The coaching staff is a huge part of that, but you want to make sure that the environment and everything that comes along with playing football on Montlake it's all about that energy and that atmosphere, and obviously winning that game was a huge part of that. And Lars, with that being said, that was a pretty positive day, I would say, for Husky Nation as a whole. And I think, but with some of the recent hires that have been made, things are looking up here on Montlake. And we'll get more into that right after a message from our friends over at Nissan. This week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The Iowa State Cyclones can only be described as a pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves, entering the tournament as one of the hottest teams in the country. And they have a date with Illinois this Thursday in the Sweet 16. And, I know that might hurt for any Wazoo listeners after that game and the whole Pat Chun thing. It's tough to hear that, but it just kind of is what it is at this point. You can take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure, and you can do all that by shopping at nissanusa.com. And before we get back to it, we've also got a message from our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with the eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. For all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So, Lars, there's been a lot of talk about us just being overly positive and blowing a lot of smoke about Washington's 2024 season, things beyond. We understand that the offensive line is not yet complete. We understand that there's a lot that needs to be done there, but not just in terms of football, not just in terms of basketball, but with this Pat Chun hire and with the way that, spring practice is on the horizon, the NFL draft is going to be great for the Huskies as a whole. It feels like, from some of those dark days that we've seen over the last couple of months, it feels like things are really starting to look up.
No doubt. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's important. When you look at schools like TCU, where it's like they go to the CFP and then they fall off, right? Where there's not the same level of follow up. Now again, is Washington going to play for a national championship next year? Probably not. No, right? Probably not. Right? You never say never, but I would put those chances at very, 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 very slim. That being said, to continue on the progression and kind of the energy, keeping the I don't want to say mojo, but kind of just keeping the trajectory on an upward trend, right? Where, you're going to go a little bit low, but still all the momentum and all the wind is still at your sail. I think that's something perfect for sailgating, right? It's like that, Pat Chun kind of
That was good.
Can just kind of roll right on Lake Washington, just roll right in there. Jedd Fisch can do the same thing. And really, honestly, when you look at it, all of the hires, Jedd Fisch has been a natural fit at Washington. Danny Sprinkle, by all intents and purposes, seems like he's going to be a natural fit as a head coach, right? Just everything is seeming more natural, right? And there was almost like a weird kind of, I don't want to say aura, but where it's like, hey, all this good stuff is happening, but it's almost like, like how long is it going to last? How stable actually is it? Where it's like, it's almost too quiet, where it's like, hey, it's almost too good, right? And then you lose the national championship to Michigan. You can't really fault anybody for that when Michigan goes 15-0. But to continue on that energy and all this positive momentum that we're talking about, and then honestly going into the spring portal, right, where we're talking with a number of guys like we mentioned Philip Bleedy on yesterday's show. I talked to him today, and it's kind of just ironic where how many things are coming full circle, where he was going to take an official visit to Arizona the last time he transferred after leaving Texas Tech, ended up canceling that official visit, sets Washington as his first official visit. He was laughing. He's like, I'm not canceling this one. I'm taking my opportunity to just go around. And I think it's almost kind of like, it's symbolic of it. Jedd Fisch has had countless opportunities. The resume speaks for itself. but he's ready to plant the flag at Washington. He's ready. Pat Chun, he's been around the block a couple of times. He's ready to stay at Washington. Troy Dannen was great for, getting Jedd Fisch and all that, but kind of rode the coattails more of what already was established than actually did anything to truly implement things moving forward. Whether you credit him with Danny,
he did a good job hiring Jedd Fisch. I'll give him that.
Right, and then that's what I'm saying. And then how much you want to credit him for Sprinkle and obviously the basketball facilities, but it just seems like he at least didn't sink it. He didn't sink it, but he kind of just kept it there, hand it off to Pat Chun, and now we're going to watch Pat Chun do wonders with this, because I think also being in state, and just to kind of carry over from back to the first segment, Pat, being in state already, he already knows the lay of the land in Washington State. He doesn't have to learn the new NIL. I think he can also be somebody that, with Montlake Futures, is instrumental in actually getting laws passed on the book for NIL in the state of Washington, where it's not just you got to follow these guidelines or whatever. There's no actual NIL law in the state. So I think all this momentum is only going to be positive for Washington heading into the Big Ten.
I couldn't agree more. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure we talked about this today, because it's not just one thing. It's a combination of all these things, because the move to the Big Ten is another thing to be excited about. I understand why some people are down on it, why some people might not even want to be continuing to be Washington fans when it comes to the tradition of everything and the loss of certain things. And that's all totally understandable. But on the other side of it, this is just kind of for the next generation as well, where you can build on new things. You can rekindle old rivalries and make new ones when it comes to Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. That's cool. Those are fun new things to think about. And with the ever expanding college football playoff, it'd probably be 32 teams by, the next time we record this podcast, because, it's just expanding every other day at this point. But with that said, Washington did its job to make sure it gets a seat at the table. And with all due respect to Washington State, they don't have that seat. They are in no position to have that kind of seat right now. And it feels more and more like you need to be in one of these power conferences to do so. And with all these things that are working in Washington's favor, it feels like this momentum is going to keep on building. Like you said, NIL with football. We'll see what Jedd Fisch looks like, but that's why we keep saying 8-4, probably maybe 7-5, 9-3, somewhere in that ballpark is where this team is going to be. Where, it's a fall off from the national championship, but it could be worse. It's not, it won't be TCU 2.0. We know that. And that in itself is a win. If Danny Sprinkle can come in and revitalize this basketball program, one of the things that, because he went on 93.3 with KJR and Dave Softy Mahler and gave a fantastic interview. And the fact that he talked about the exact same thing, where, as you talked about with Pat Chun, with knowing the lay of the land, the fact that he was a big Husky fan growing up, his dad played football in Montlake, his sister still lives in the area and comes to Husky games. That's all just kind of exactly what I feel like fans want from this program. And if those three things are going well, if the AD is in a really good spot, if football can be really good and potentially be great on a year in, year out basis, and basketball is, same thing, where it's potentially very good, maybe can make an NCAA tournament over the next couple of years. If all those things fall into place, there's a good thing cooking here.
Exactly. And going back to what I said earlier, there's no reason why it wouldn't, right? I think there's some things where you're trying to talk yourself into it. Maybe we might have talked ourselves into Troy Dannen, but again, it's one of those where I personally know Pat. I've met him countless times. I feel like I have a pretty good connection with the guy. So I think, and that was one name that always to me where it's like, okay, I can see it's hard to leave Washington State, especially given the circumstances. But then after he did it at the right time, where it's like, had he done it last October, it would have been pretty cowardly, right? Where it's like, wow, you're bailing before the stuff totally hits the fan. Like, at least he stayed all the way through and showed some more character there.
So that's exactly what I was going to say, where that's exactly what it was, where he was certainly a target in the last search as well. And he didn't want to leave because he knew that he needed to see things through and needed to see where things fell. And I'm sure if there were some other jobs that might have come open, maybe they would have called him. But just the fact that it all happened the way that it did just not only worked out really, really well for him, but it worked out really well for Washington, where he was still available and it's an easy hire. And Coug fans are going to be salty. Coug fans are going to say whatever they will, but it all fell into place really, really well. And, props to him for sticking that out and saying, I'm going to see this through and I'm going to do the best that I can with the hand that I've been dealt.
Exactly, and that's the other thing, where you can drag Troy Dannen if you want to, right, for saying, hey, Washington's a broke program and then leaving in the 11th hour, right, in the middle of the night. But for Pat, he stayed all the way through, stayed through Mike Leach, stayed through everything. If he truly wanted to just take an 80 job, there's plenty. You could have gone to Tulane, could have gone to, maybe not Tulane, but maybe could have gone a number of other schools.
What a name to bring up.
But there's plenty of other openings. My point that, if he truly wanted to, he's coveted enough where he popped up in enough searches that he could have gone at any point for a number of jobs. Maybe not Ohio State. Maybe that's a job he still covets. But again, if you're Washington, wouldn't you take 3 years with Pat Chun if he sets you up right in the Big Ten and then he goes to Ohio State? It's like, okay, yeah, you can't fault the guy for going back to his alma mater. But also, given that Ross Bjork just took over Ohio State, that's not going to be anytime soon. So that's a safe hire. Whereas with Dannen, you could always kind of get the sense of maybe he's this. And even with Kalen, right, where maybe he gets a better job, maybe he goes to Michigan, whatever. It's like, well, no, now you're pretty solid. Now you don't have a reason to go unless you want a marquee top 5 job, which at this point you could almost argue that's what Kalen should have done at Washington. That's what Pat can turn Washington into. Pat can now turn Washington into a top 10 job versus going and finding a top 10 job or top 5 job from a top 20 school.
Lars, you hit the nail on the head there. And with that being said, thank you so much for being here. As always, thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We've got so much fun stuff. Make sure you tune in tomorrow when our good buddy Ben Glassmeyer will be here with us to do a full pro day preview before, the big event on Thursday morning, where we will be there on scene. So we're going to have a lot coming from that as well. And to make sure you're stay up to date with everything it is that we're going to be doing over here, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you hit that subscribe button, click that little bell so you get a notification every time we post a new video. Make sure you like the video, leave us a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.